Often, I rant about the oil and gas companies lying to us, or the blah, blah, blah of politicians who promise decarbonization and clean lifestyles, while at the same time signing off on new oil pipelines. And in general, as some of you know, hopefully most of you, I am angry at the sheer nonsense we are asked to believe every day. The latest hypocrite, for example, is none other than Mark Carney, formerly a climate action champion and now the Prime Minister of Canada. So he gets into office, and what happens next? He pretty much immediately scraps Canada's consumer carbon tax, courts the oil and gas sector, axes a scheme to boost electric cars, signs a deal to produce an extra million barrels of crude oil a day, and pledges to double Canada's LNG production for new markets in Asia. All of this in less than 1 year. I mean, where does one even start when talking about Mark Carney? But today is different. Fasten your seatbelts. We're looking at 2025, the entire year. And for the first time in a long time, the data isn't just less bad. It is genuinely, structurally, irreversibly good. We are seeing the cracks in the fossil fuel fortress turn into gaping holes. I've compiled my annual top 10 good climate news stories of 2025. These aren't just headlines. They are, and I hope you'll agree, nails in the coffin of the fossil fuel era. I want to tell you these stories today because the other side, the lobbyists, the incumbents, the parasites, they want you to believe that resistance is futile. They want you to feel hopeless. But it's they who are losing. Just stay tuned. Welcome to the Angry Clean Energy Guy podcast with me, Asad Razouk. I am so happy you're here. Thank you. In descending order, here are my top 10 good climate news stories of 2025. At number 10, the end of Styrofoam. We start small in changing the world, but it can go massive at any time. For decades, you and I and everybody else have accepted that when you buy a TV, it comes wrapped in poison. And I mean literally poison. Styrofoam that lasts 500 years. Yeah, you heard that right. 500 years. And styrofoam, just to be clear, is just a fancy word for oil derivative. It's basically made from oil. So your TV comes with oil. But this year, we saw the industrial scaling of what's called lignin foam. Lignin is the glue that holds trees together. And it's a waste product of the paper industry. So what did we used to do? We used to burn it. Now we're turning it into a biodegradable foam that works just as well as the plastic, aka oil, stuff. And the fake news was always that it's too expensive to be green. As you know, that's because we're not pricing the destruction from the oil and gas products, in this case, plastics and styrofoam, because we're not paying for their impact on our environment, clean air, water, and so on. But in 2025, we started scaling using waste to replace this particular type of poison. And it's circular, it's obvious. And finally, it's happening. Major logistics firms began replacing styrofoam with lignin-based alternatives to meet new EU packaging waste regulations. And here's a fun fact. In October 2025, just a couple of months ago, IKEA quietly announced it would completely phase out polystyrene, so styrofoam, in favor of fiber-based and lignin packaging for all flat pack furniture globally by 2028. And God knows IKEA sells an enormous amount of flat pack furniture globally. And IKEA cited, guess what? The lignin foam durability. And my number 10 good climate news story of the year is there to highlight so many who are working on finding alternatives to plastic around the world. Thank you. At number 9, Nepal's electric sprint. I love this story because it proves so many so-called Western experts wrong. They told us that poorer countries and the global south in general would be addicted to oil for decades. But look at the facts. In 2025, reports confirm that 76% of all passenger car sales in Nepal were electric. And why is that? Because Nepal has rivers, they have hydropower. Why would they import expensive, dirty, polluting fossil fuels for their cars when they can run those cars on their own clean electrons? This, by the way, is energy sovereignty. It's critical. It's national security. It's the death of the oil import model happening right now in the Himalayas. And here's a fun fact. In 2025, Nepal exported over $100 million worth of surplus hydroelectricity to Bangladesh for the first time. Why? Because they could finally afford to, and proving that their clean electrons are now a major export community also. At number 8, Ireland kicks the habit. Ireland may be a small island, but it was where a giant signal was emitted from this year when they became the number 6 European country to end coal power completely. And I love this particular story because there's a twist. They didn't just shut down the Money Point coal plant, that was their last operating coal plant, and walk away. They actually are retrofitting it into a renewable energy hub for offshore wind. Ireland literally took the symbol of the old era, a dirty, ugly, soot-spewing plant, and they're turning it into the gateway for the new one. And the takeaway is that you don't have to destroy the economy to save the climate. You just have to swap the fuel. And here's a fun fact. The retrofit that Ireland is going through for that Money Point coal plant includes the installation of what's called a synchronous condenser, which is the world's largest of its kind. And that is going to provide grid stability that the coal plants used to provide. So Ireland is making another very strong point, which is that you do not need fossil fuels to keep the grid stable. Thank you, Ireland. My number 7 good climate news story of the year is that we are finally breathing a little bit easier in India. If you've ever been anywhere in North India in winter, you know what I'm talking about. The air tastes like smoke. Air quality indices are completely out of control. A health emergency is prevalent. But this year, the World Bank and India together launched a massive air cleaning program. And what that means is it's a strategy that approaches air pollution as a shared problem within adjacent geographic areas, rather than just within a city or a state, and focuses on coordinating action across that shared or common geographic area, in this case, North India, because obviously pollution travels across borders. And the World Bank approved a $1.5 billion loan for the National Clean Air Program, Airshed Management, in mid-2025. And this shift from city-based to regional-based management of air pollution was critical. They're now pouring billions into clean cooking, electric buses, and farming tech to stop crop burning, which was one of the principal drivers of that health emergency from dirty air that North India was breathing for months at a time. And the conflict that was successfully solved there was between bureaucracy on the one hand, and of course, biology. Guess what? Biology finally started winning. And here's a fun fact. For the first time in at least 20 years, satellite data from November 2025, just last month, showed a 15% reduction in crop burning fires across the Indian states of Punjab and Haryana compared to the previous 5-year average. And that was directly attributable to the airshed management program. So thank you, World Bank, India, and biology for beating back bureaucracy. My number 6 good climate news story of the year is that the Amazon is back. For years, I've ranted about the destruction of the Amazon. I've spoken about it on this podcast, on countless social media posts, in my book, Saving the Planet Without the Bullshit, because it all felt hopeless. But look at the data this year. In Colombia, deforestation is down 33%. In Brazil, it's down 11%. And do you know why? Because we stopped paying for offsets, which are mostly a scam, and started paying sovereign nations for the utility of keeping the trees alive. And so the tree is now worth more standing than dead. And that's the only economic logic that works. And it is working. Directly related to this drop in deforestation, something called the Tropical Forest Forever Facility was officially launched in late 2025 ahead of COP30 in Belém, Brazil. And the deforestation drops in Colombia and Brazil track with the aggressive enforcement policies of both administrations in Colombia and Brazil. And here's a fun fact. The Tropical Forest Forever Facility secured an initial capitalization of $5 billion within just months of launching, with sovereign wealth funds from Norway, from Singapore, from the UAE, becoming all surprising lead anchor investors. Thank you. Coming up are the top 5 good climate news stories of 2025. Stay tuned. Welcome back. My number 5 good climate news story of 2025 is China's electric trucks, because they are the silent oil killer. And this is the story that oil traders are losing sleep over. Do you remember that we were told that heavy trucks, and frankly, we're still being told that heavy trucks could not be electrified because batteries are too heavy, blah, blah, because physics won't allow it, blah, blah. But that was all nonsense, and it still is. In 2025, this year, over 22% of all heavy-duty truck sales in China were electric. That's up from nothing 3 years ago. And guess what? The speed of adoption is so fast that it's going to be close to 100% within a couple of years. Not 5 years, not 10 years. And this matters because a heavy-duty truck is a workhorse. It's basically running all day. And by switching to electricity, China is already displacing over 1 million barrels of oil of demand per day. That number is accelerating. This is oil demand destruction happening live right now. The diesel engine is a walking dead. And here's a fun fact. The related game changer in 2025 was not just the trucks, but the battery swapping network. This year, China completed its long-haul electric corridor connecting Beijing to Guangzhou, where trucks can swap batteries in 5 minutes every 300 kilometers. And just so that you put that in perspective, the driving distance from Beijing to Guangzhou is about 1,300 miles or 2,100 kilometers. That's the same thing as the distance between New York City and Omaha, Nebraska, or from the top of Europe in Oslo down to Venice. And the Chinese have a long-haul electric corridor across all that distance where heavy trucks can stop, swap batteries in 5 minutes every 300 kilometers, and then keep going. Amazing, isn't it? Over to my number 4. My number 4 good climate news story of 2025 is the global EV tipping point. I don't know if you've picked up in the media recently a lot of crap about how EV demand is cooling. So that allegedly the demand for electric cars is cooling. That is a lie. In 2025, global EV sales smashed past 22 million units. Remember, it was pretty much zero 5 years ago. Cumulatively, we're at over 50 million electric cars on the road globally, and 80 million if you count the plug-in vehicles on top. And the real story, frankly, isn't even those sales. It's actually the car fleet. Because what you're seeing in almost all markets is a peak of the petrol cars, i.e., while EV car sales are becoming an increasing percentage of new car sales, at the same time, petrol car sales are just going down. And the total number of petrol cars on the road globally has started to shrink. And this wasn't driven by eco guilt. It was driven by better technology. It was driven by the fact that taxing jet fuel, taxing gasoline, is finally starting to incentivize the switch. And frankly, governments that aren't taxing jet fuel and gasoline on a continuous incremental basis are just being irresponsible. The internal combustion engine had a 100-year run and it's now over. It's finished. And here's a fun fact. In a symbolic milestone, Ethiopia, which banned petrol car imports in 2024, yes, you heard that right, Ethiopia actually banned the import of any petrol car last year. So Ethiopia reported this year that its national fuel import bill is down 30% year on year. It's paying 30% less year on year to buy oil and gas from abroad because of the switch to EVs. And that in turn is inspiring 5 other African countries to announce similar future bans on petrol cars. Now that's leadership. Thank you, Ethiopia. My number 3 good climate news story of 2025 is Europe's solar victory. And this is just a great story. There's so many skeptics who said, oh, solar can't work in Europe. Actually, I still hear that all the time. Oh, it's too cloudy in Europe. Oh, it's too dark, and so on. But in 2025, this year, solar power alone overtook coal in the European Union's entire electricity mix. And in May 2025, we had a strong signal of how much better it's going to get ahead, because that's when solar briefly produced more power, so solar alone, than all fossil fuels combined in the EU. They told us that the grid would collapse. Well, guess what? It didn't. Actually, with batteries now cheaper than ever, the grid is stronger, not weaker. And the sun gave its own response. It shines enough, even in Germany, to beat back coal lobbyists. It's really that simple. Did you know, for example, that Germany spent 75 billion euros importing fossil fuels last year in 2024? And somehow, big oil and their lobbyists try to convince the public that solar or EVs or heat pumps are too expensive. I mean, that's insane. And remember what big oil and their lobbyists do. They exaggerate the price that we have to pay to change. They downplay the cost of the status quo. They forget about the $7 trillion of subsidies that they receive, and they swipe that under the carpet. And then they pretend that importing oil, gas, and coal is somehow the cheaper, safer option. And that's just drivel. In fact, if you stop to think about it, renewable energy is the only part of the energy system in a country where money actually stays almost completely in the domestic economy. None of it goes to petrostates or Exxon or Shell or whatever. Your engineering, your installation, your maintenance, your land lease, your manufacturing, your grid services, your storage, your innovation, all stay domestically. As do the non-existent payments for fuel, of course, because the sun and the wind are free of charge. And here's a fun fact. The solar victory in Europe created something called the noon bonus. And that's super interesting and shows you how we react and we adapt and we improve systems. Today, industries in Spain and Germany are shifting their heavy manufacturing loads to, you guessed it, the middle of the day. Why? Because that's when solar power is at its maximum, and therefore electricity prices frequently go negative between 11 in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And electricity prices have only one way to go: the faster we roll out renewables. And now on to number two. My number two global climate news story of the year is that the law finally bites. I've been angry for years that oil companies and gas companies and petrochemical companies can literally destroy the climate, like proactively destroy the climate, but face zero consequences. This year, however, the International Court of Justice changed the rules. The ICJ ruled that nations have a legal obligation to protect the environment from greenhouse gases, which, as you know, the overwhelming majority of comes from burning oil, gas, and coal. The ICJ delivered an advisory opinion, quote, obligations of states in respect of climate change, end of quote, in July 2025. And it explicitly linked greenhouse gas emissions to the violation of international legal obligations, and I cannot emphasize how important that is. The polluters have been saying, oh, climate change is politics, may exist, doesn't exist. Oh, don't worry about it, technology is going to fix it. Oh, it's way too expensive to do something about it, keep paying us our rent money for the oil and gas and coal that we're selling you, and so on. But the ICJ came and said, no, it's the law. Climate inaction is illegal. And what that does is it opens the door for liability, because it means that the era of impunity is ending. It will take a few years to play out, but mark my words, the era of impunity is ending. And here's a fun fact. Right after the ruling, a coalition of small island developing states immediately did what? They filed a $100 billion class action style lawsuit against the top oil companies, the carbon majors, in Dutch and UK courts, citing the very ICJ opinion as the primary legal precedent. And I would expect that that's just the first in a tsunami of lawsuits that needs to hit big oil, because, as the ICJ ruled, greenhouse gas emissions are directly linked to the violation of international legal obligations. So let's recap where we are in the top 10 good climate news stories of 2025. At number 10, the end of Styrofoam. At number 9, Nepal's electric sprint. At number 8, Ireland kicks the habit. At number 7, breathing easier in India. At number 6, the Amazon bounces back. At number 5, China's electric trucks are the silent oil killer. At number 4, the global EV tipping point. At number 3, Europe's solar victory. And at number 2, the law finally bites. And the number one good climate news story of the year is the global tipping point. Here it is, my most important story of 2025. For the first time in human history, renewables beat coal as the world's largest source of electricity generation. For decades, the International Energy Agency, lots of governments, all of big oil, so many big banks told us, actually sold us a story. They said, basically, that renewables are cute, but coal is real energy. Coal is the baseload. And in 2025, that lie died. The IEA's own Electricity 2025 report confirmed that renewables surpassed coal as the largest source of electricity generation globally in early 2025. Not in Europe, not in Texas, not in California, globally. And this, if you think about it, is the global tipping point because it marks the definitive structural decline of the fossil fuel era. That era didn't just stumble. It was overtaken by technology, by economics, by physics. There is no way it was going to stand its ground. And here's a fun fact. The symbolic death knell for fossil fuel baseload arguments came from the financial markets. Because in 2025, global insurance giants like Swiss Re and Munich Re announced they would no longer underwrite any new coal-fired power plants. They effectively made them uninsurable and unbankable pretty much anywhere in the world. So now that we're at the end of the top 10, what do these stories tell us? They tell us that the transition is not coming. It's here. Actually, they also tell us that it's not a transition. It's a transformation. The fossil fuel industry is just fighting a rearguard action. They're fighting the law. They're fighting economics. They're fighting physics. They're fighting the moral arc of the universe. And in 2025, this year, they started losing on all fronts. And don't let the noise distract you. Action is the antidote to despair in the fight against the climate crisis. We have the technology, we have the capital, we have the lowest cost, we have the moral high ground, we have public opinion, and we have momentum. And before I go, I have two asks or requests that you may want to think about next year. First, we know the fossil fuel industry is losing. We know the technology is winning. But the incumbents are still using one thing to delay their inevitable disappearance into the sunset, and that's your money. They're using your bank deposits, your pension funds to prop up their crumbling fortress. So my ask is, check your money, open your pension app, look at your bank, ask yourself, is my capital betting on the dying past or on the living future? If your bank is still funding new oil pipelines in 2026, or if your pension fund is still overweight in coal, then just fire them. Move your money. And my second ask is stop tolerating the doom. When you are at a dinner party or in a boardroom and someone says, oh, renewables are too expensive, or EVs don't work in the cold, don't stay silent. Fight back. These are not just opinions. These are marketing lines directly from a dying industry. Correct them. Show them the data. Tell them about Nepal. Tell them about Ethiopia. Tell them about the Chinese trucks. The transformation happens fastest when we stop polite silence in the fact of nonsense. So be loud, be accurate, and be optimistic. Thank you so much for listening to the Angry Clean Energy Guy with me, Asad Razouk, and have a great Christmas and a healthy and fulfilling 2026. Speak to you next year. Thank you.